Hello, my name is Juan Carlos Alarcon, and I am the Sub-Dean of the St. Joseph Valley chapter of the American Guild of Organists. Today I am joined by Dr. Kola Owolabi, who is Professor of Organ here at the University of Notre Dame. He teaches the graduate organ performance majors in the Sacred Music program, as well as courses in hymn playing and improvisation. He previously held faculty appointments at the University of Michigan and at Syracuse University. Dr. Owolabi has had an active career as a solo recitalist, including performances in New York, Los Angeles, Toronto, Cornell University, Pacific Lutheran University, and the University of Notre Dame. International venues include the Klosterneuburg Abbey, Austria, Église du Bouclier in Strasbourg, France, and the University of the West Indies in Mona, Jamaica. He holds degrees in organ performance and choral conducting from McGill University, Montreal, Yale University, and the Eastman School of Music. Dr. Owolabi, thank you for agreeing to this interview. The friends and members of our chapter are eager to hear about you and your career and interests. So let's begin with, how did you become interested in the organ?
So when I was 10 years old, my parents sent my brother and I to the Cathedral Choir School attached to the Roman Catholic Cathedral in Toronto. And in addition to a regular academic curriculum, we had daily choral rehearsals, and every student in the school sang at one of the masses in the cathedral every Saturday or Sunday. So as a choir boy, hearing the wonderful organ in the cathedral and hearing the music that was played really inspired me. And I'd learned to play a lot by ear at the time, and I would come home and try to imitate things that I had heard the organist do on our piano at home. And I was taking piano lessons at the school, but a couple of years later, my mother made arrangements for us to begin to study the organ. And so I took lessons. We had a 3-manual pipe organ in the choir school. And then a few years after that, they had some staff changes at the school, and they started relying on older students to play the organ for most of the masses of the cathedral. So when I was 15, I became responsible for playing the 3 morning masses every Sunday during the school year at the cathedral.
How was the dynamic of, you said you were fairly young when you had that responsibility, 15.
Mm-hmm.
How was that dynamic working with the older students and your professors and your teachers with the younger? How did you feel having that responsibility?
It was really great. All of the singers were between the ages of 10 and 18. So it was just a wonderful experience to work with the different choirs and the conductors, many of whom were alumni at the school. I had a lot of mentoring opportunities of leading section rehearsals with the younger students in particular. We would go on tours to different parts of the country, and I often had times when I was asked to supervise a group of younger students. And I played a lot of weddings where there might be 8 to 10 of the younger choristers singing. So it was a great opportunity for me to teach them and mentor them.
And you said this was in Toronto, correct?
Yeah.
And is that where you're originally from?
That's where I spent most of my childhood. I was born in New Brunswick, and then my family moved to Toronto when I was 1. And then when I was 5, we moved to Nigeria for 5 years, which was actually where I began my musical training. I took piano lessons there. And actually, I should mention that when I was 8, the Nigerian government had a policy which forced most foreigners to leave the country very suddenly. And my piano teacher, who had been the organist at the Catholic church we attended there, was forced to leave to go back to Ghana, where he was from. So I began to play the harmonium at the church in Nigeria at age 8 and accompany basically simple hymns. But I'd only been taking piano lessons for years, so it was kind of baptism by fire. But then we moved back to Toronto when I was 10, and that's when I enrolled in the Cathedral Choir School there.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Is there any particular body of repertoire that you specialize in?
I have always been interested in a really wide variety of repertoire. In fact, I feel that I don't practice very well if I'm not working on a few things in different styles. That's what I need to keep motivated and energized. I love the music of Bach. I'm right now working on a project to learn all of the chorales from the Leipzig manuscript. I played 6 of them, and so I'm now working on the other 11. And I also really enjoy all of the big French Romantic repertoire. Duruflé might be my favorite composer from that tradition. But I've delved into some areas of repertoire that are lesser known. I've played a lot of Italian music from the 16th and 17th century, also Spanish music from the 17th century. I got pretty involved with the Oregon Historical Society a number of years ago and got interested in late 19th century, early 20th century American organs that way. So I've begun to delve into some of that repertoire, as well as the repertoire by English composers written in the early part of the 20th century.
Great, thank you. One of the things that's going on today in the world and in the music scene is bringing out and focusing on those composers and musicians who are not very often performed, especially musicians of color. What do you feel, or how are you adding to that? You know, bringing forth those musicians and the music that they wrote.
So I think there's really interesting repertoire by composers from underrepresented traditions, and that's definitely also been a part of what I've tried to promote as a musician. So right now I'm working on a project dealing with repertoire by Black composers from all over the world. In fact, I'll be recording some pieces in the Basilica on the new Fritz organ, probably sometime over the break. Some pieces by Samuel Coleridge Taylor, who was a composer who had an English mother, and his father was from Sierra Leone. And he studied at the Royal College of Music with Stanford, who considered him to be one of his best pupils, along with Herbert Howells. But he has the set of 3 impromptus for the organ, which are really wonderful pieces, and I look forward to recording them and playing them. The other piece I'm hoping to record over the break is a piece by Thomas Kerr called An Anguished American Easter. And this was a piece which began as an improvisation. It was his own personal response to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. So he improvised this piece on Good Friday of 1969, and then performed parts of it that he fleshed out over a couple of days in parts of Easter Sunday services that year, and then greatly expanded the piece to incorporate a much more dissonant language that he felt reflected the tragedy of the situation. And the piece has gone through several revisions over the course of his lifetime and was issued in a new publication a number of years ago by GIA. So that's the version of it that I've been working on and plan to record very soon.
Wow, it sounds like you'll be very busy during this break. It's many of the people that will watch this interview, that will listen to the interview, have come from many different backgrounds, culturally, and different denominations. Why is it important that we use our craft to advocate for the things that we believe in?
Well, I think, having lived in a number of different cities now, and a number of different countries and different continents, culture is just so interesting and so important. It's what makes us who we are and gives us a sense of identity. But at the same time, I also begin to feel like people are people, no matter where you go. And whatever you can celebrate from any culture can be really inspiring to you and to the people around you. And art and music is certainly something that I think we can all relate to and all tap into. So I think we're all enriched when we explore music, art, culture, food from different traditions.
Yeah, I think that's very important. Let's talk about Notre Dame. You have finished your first semester. Uh, how was it?
It has been great in a lot of ways. I mean, I've been aware of things going on here for many years. Craig Kramer has been a good friend and mentor to me. He invited me to play here a number of years ago and teach a master class. My brother did his PhD here, so I visited a number of times and saw things that were going on campus. And my opinion has been very consistent. I've been amazed by the generosity and kindness of people I've met here. I think there are incredible scholars in so many different fields across the university, and there's a wonderful sense of collaboration between faculty. I've really enjoyed getting to know my students and work with them. So I would say that although starting a job in the middle of a pandemic certainly has its challenges, I felt very happy here, and I felt embraced by the Notre Dame community.
Well, we're so glad that you're here. What were some of the challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome them?
I would say one of the most difficult things has been not being able to interact with people face to face to the extent that we're used to. So I've got colleagues who I've only seen over Zoom meetings, for instance, that I haven't had a chance to really sit down with and get to know. Luckily, I've been able to do the great part of my teaching in person this semester. Since the organs are in large spaces, it's been very easy for us to socially distance. But there are still changes in terms of how you do things. It's not really possible to look over a student's shoulder during a lesson. So I've had to bring copies of pieces that they're playing to every lesson. So I'm constantly carrying around a lot of music with me. I owned a lot of it, but there were pieces that I didn't have where a student, for instance, has had to scan and send me a copy of a piece so that I could engage with them during the lesson.
So the previous professor of organ had been here for quite some time. And he created this vision. And how does one feel when you step into this role now? And what is your vision for the organ department here at Notre Dame?
So it's very inspiring to look at the program that's been built here. I think Craig Kramer really did a lot for the organ culture at Notre Dame. And of course, the Sacred Music at Notre Dame program has very dedicated and accomplished faculty. So I just feel like I'm now another member of this team. And it's remarkable the collection of instruments that has been assembled on campus, particularly the two large instruments by Paul Fritz in the DiBartolo Performing Arts Center and at the Basilica of the Sacred Heart, but also the Italian Baroque organ, an instrument which we think was built sometime around 1680, which was acquired by the university relatively recently. So it's wonderful to be able to play and teach on those instruments. I've started a 4-semester sequence of classes in hymn playing and improvisation, which is a new aspect of the curriculum. And I think this will just help to supplement the mentorship that the students have been getting from the staff at the Basilica and in the churches in the area where they have their internships. It gives us a chance to have a little bit more of a systematic look at things that students have already been doing, and to be able to take some time to explore things outside of a setting where they might have to very quickly perform something, perform an anthem or play a hymn in church. They can take time to really learn some skills and think about exactly how they approach it. So we just had a wonderful first semester on creative hymn playing. We spent a lot of time looking at how you create your own harmonizations and put the melody in different voices. Um, for instance, playing the melody and the pedal while reharmonizing the hymn. And the last couple of weeks we spent looking at African American hymnody and really thinking about how to bring life and energy to music from the African American spiritual and gospel traditions. Some of this is music that was folk music or music intended for soloists, but thinking about how do you perform this music in a congregational setting in a way that still has the vitality and energy that is an important part of that music. And I think the students all had a really good time with it, and I was surprised at the level at which they were able to really get into some of the stylistic features of the music.
Sounds like a great class. And during this time of pandemic and uncertainty, there's a really planning for things in the future is a little, it's not very stable. But in a perfect scenario, where do you hope the Notre Dame organ department would be in 5 years, let's say?
So, I really think that we should be trying to have a program that would allow people to become exceptional church musicians. And one of the things that means is just having a breadth of skills. So I think the coursework that students take in liturgical studies, they can take classes in theology. Many of the organ students come here very interested in improving their skills as choral conductors, and they have opportunities to do that here. And then certainly these classes in hymn playing and in improvisation. I'd love to also teach a course in continuo, which I think is a very important aspect of working with common practice tonality and working with a lot of the hymns that we perform in church. To have a really good grasp of that harmonic language as a basis for improvisation, I think is very important to students. I'd also really like to see students diversify their repertoire in all kinds of ways, including incorporating repertoire by composers from underrepresented traditions. But also just tapping into resources in the community, Notre Dame has invested a lot in getting some very specialized instruments, but there are instruments in other styles that we don't have. So, as new organs come to the area, I think to forge connections with churches, possibly with other organ programs at different universities as well, so that students can get a greater breadth of experience, and for instance, explore repertoire by late 19th century American composers. We don't really have an instrument that does that, but I know of instruments in town, and I think as more instruments come to the area, it would be great to become connected with all of that. I know our students haven't really done competitions in the last number of years. That's something that I could see it being worth exploring, and maybe thinking outside of the box a little and not just thinking about competitions for repertoire, but competitions that would incorporate these skills in improvisation or in hymn playing and things like that might be really beneficial to furthering all of these different art forms.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have big plans for the department, and it sounds like we're in for a nice ride. But one of the questions that was submitted by our members was, what is it that you think the Notre Dame community in particular adds to the type of musicians and students you teach here?
I think it's really the interdisciplinary nature of the program, and also just the personal interest that all the faculty take in each other and in the students. And I think the students also have created this really nurturing sense of community, and I think it makes it an environment in which it's very easy for people to feel comfortable and do well.
Thank you for your answer. Another question that was submitted It's what is your all-time favorite stop on the organ?
So that's an impossible question to answer. I would say that I've always been drawn to the colorful, soft, expressive stops on an instrument. You know, I'm not one to sit down at an instrument and figure out how loud it can be. Although, you know, eventually one does end up exploring that. So some of the colorful flute stops, I love harmonic flutes. On some of the late 19th, early 20th century American organs, you have these doppel flutes, which are just incredibly rich, colorful, very big sounds for a simple flute stop. On the German Baroque organs, I think the Voxhumana stops are again some of the most noble, rich, warm, colorful sounds. So a Silbermann or Trost Voxhumana, for instance, those are typically my favorite stops on those kinds of organs.
Our next question that was submitted by one of our members, says, given the current state of COVID in our community in South Bend, and they're not permitting singing outside of a single cantor inside or outside other buildings, what ideas or suggestions do you have for church musicians to make our Christmas celebrations special and meaningful for our congregations this year?
I would say that people tend to crave familiarity at Christmas, so trying to find arrangements or perhaps doing your own arrangements or improvisations of well-known Christmas carols is something that I think might really touch people at a time when they might not be able to physically sing them in church. I was trying to think about what are some of my favorite carol arrangements for organ. The Canadian composer Denis Bédard has written a lot of works for organ that are very accessible. The harmonic language is very straightforward, although he does tend to write music that's inspired by jazz. But he has a wonderful set of 5 variations on In Dulce Jubilo, which I think is very colorful and very imaginative. It's not difficult to play. I think it's mid-November now. I think many organists would be able to learn this by Christmas Day if they, got to it right away. Richard Purvis has some interesting pieces, including his arrangement of Greensleeves. He also has a piece called Carol Rhapsody, which incorporates Silent Night, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, and O Come All Ye Faithful. It's sort of a very schmaltzy piece, lots of blues harmonies and tremolos and things like that, but I think it's the kind of thing that might really appeal to a congregation. African-American composer Adolphus Hailstork has a very interesting setting of O Come Emmanuel, so that's obviously Advent, but it's a really interesting piece that's easily available online. And then as far as some older repertoire, I always come back to the 12 Noëls of Claude Louis Daquin. The French composer who wrote these pieces probably sometime in the middle of the 18th century, and they're wonderful variation sets on old French carols, some of which may be familiar to congregations today, but I think even the pieces that aren't are very charming in their simplicity, and they're really effective pieces.
Thank you for the suggestions. I'm sure that your travel and your recital schedule has slowed down, or you may not have many, recitals going on. But are you hoping to have a church job locally where you'd serve as organist, or not so, that you have your weekends and travel?
So this is my 3rd teaching position, and for the last 2, I found that I don't really have time to take on a church position on the side. I could imagine that might change 10 years from now when I feel really comfortable with all the aspects of my work. But at the moment, I'm finding that weekends are a time to get a little bit more focused practicing and reading about a lot of different things. For instance, I'm really exploring African-American repertoire at the moment and getting ready to work on a commissioned piece that I've been asked to write, hopefully over the next couple of months. And so these are the kinds of projects I found myself pretty occupied with on weekends. That, hopefully as things get back to some sense of normality, I could see myself going to churches as a guest maybe and performing a prelude and postlude or accompanying the congregation on hymns and things like that with some regularity without having a regular position.
Well, we'll definitely keep that in mind as we move forward in the chapter with our events. What would you say to somebody who's just starting the organ or a young organist? I know that for me, I remember going through the AGO magazine and seeing your picture there with as a recitalist or interviews or different things that you have done. And so sitting here with you is just, I remember those days when I'm like, I hope one day I get to meet Dr. Owolabi, and here we are. What would you say to the young organist or those who, young at heart, that are just beginning their journey with the organ?
I would say, the organ is a really wonderful instrument because it can touch so many people in different ways, and it's something that requires a lot of dedication. I think we can all think back to our first year or so of playing the organ and the time it takes to get even just a basic comfort level of playing with your hands and feet. But I think it's really worth the time that it takes to get that level of comfort. And I think most of us within a year of playing their instrument, we're at a point where we can play hymns at our local church, and you begin to see immediately the joy and inspiration that the instrument can bring to people. Just the number of different colors that you have available, the number of different emotions that different sounds on the organ can bring to a setting. So I think it's an instrument that really can have a lot of appeal. Now, there are people who have very little exposure to the organ for any number of reasons. So I think that's something that organists can always think about. When I play recitals, for instance, I really think about programming and who is this concert for, what are the things that'll resonate with them. And one of the things that, for me, that I always consider a sign of a successful program is if when the audience talks with me afterwards, if every piece on the program is mentioned by someone as being their favorite piece, I think this was the program that was right for that audience. But I think the organ can really enrich liturgies in our church settings. There are many people who I think resonate more with the organ in a non-liturgical, secular setting, and I think we also need to be aware of those people as well and see what are things that we can do that'll speak to them musically. And so I think, there are organists that have gotten interested in, for instance, improvising accompaniments to silent films, or having repertoire that's based on secular sources of thematic material rather than necessarily something that's based on a chorale or a Gregorian chant tune or something like that. I think there's a lot of potential for the organ to speak to different people coming from very different places. There's also all the repertoire for organ and other instruments. Number of 20th century composers who've recently written pieces for organ and saxophone, and that might be a way of getting teenagers who play in bands and things like that to hear a piece that involves the organ, even if they don't come from a church background. So I think the organ has just a very rich history, and we're part of that history. It's still continuing to grow and develop. And I would just encourage people who are interested in it to develop their skills. They say it's It's not something that doesn't come without a lot of effort, but I found it to be really, really rewarding.
Well, Dr. Owolabi, thank you for your time and thank you for sitting with me and talking. And thank you for what you have done in the community here at Notre Dame. As a student here at the Sacred Music program, I have seen the positive contributions that you've brought to the campus and to the Student Life Committee and just to the organ program here. I look forward to seeing your success here at the university and in the community. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's been great talking with you this morning.